Hi, welcome everybody. Today is June 15th. Once again, here with Dr. Jeff Andresen, the state climatologist at MSU, to give us a weather update. We've had a little bit of rain now recently, at least I think several areas got it, and I know we got some around here, which we definitely needed. So, Jeff, look forward to hearing your report today.
We did have some rain to talk about, but it's I think it's really important. It depended on what cloud where you were, because it was very or highly variable and scattered. But some people were very fortunate and very lucky. I don't even want to mention it, but I here in my place in Hazlet, I was one of the recipients and am looking out on a little bit greener landscape than was certainly the case over the last couple of weeks. But there are unfortunately many areas that saw either little or not enough precipitation. But I think the on the upshot and then the more positive uh, aspects here, we are looking at least a temporary change in the weather to something more normal, or certainly something different. And I'm going to start with that here. Again, looking at some upper air maps, which I think tell the whole story of where we are. We're currently, just like we saw at last week's briefing, we talked about the formation of a trough over the eastern part of the country, and that has happened. This is the map here over on the far left-hand side here, and you can see this upper air feature here. And we have air from Canada over the region here this morning, and we'll be here for the next couple of days with beautiful, ideal conditions, highs in the 70s, lows actually dropping down to the 40s. It'll be a few degrees cooler than normal. And also, just as importantly, it's dry air. There's very low humidity associated with the air. So again, just gorgeous conditions. But not look at the same map. You look out to our west, huge ridge. And what's really striking about this pattern is it's the middle of June. We're getting close to solstice here, and we have this huge high amplitude pattern. And by high amplitude, we're talking here just very large north to south ridges and troughs. And what that amounts to ultimately on the surface, of course, are very anomalously warm or cool areas across the mid latitudes. And if you've been watching the national news here, you know that underneath this ridge, this is the source of all of that heat, record heat out there, drought conditions, fire danger, red flag warnings, etc. All of that is associated with that big ridge out there. But it's much larger than it typically is at this time of the year. Typically in the summer, we see relatively flat or low amplitude flow is much more typical for this season. What we see here is more typical for the cold season. So it's been one of those oddities that we follow. Now let's look ahead here, because by just in the next couple of days, by Thursday, note that the forecast has the trough shifting, not real far, but definitely off to the east. And more importantly here for us, the ridge temporarily flattens out across Canada and the northern U.S. And you can see that here for Thursday at 8 o'clock. There's still a little bit of a ridge here, but it's a very dynamic situation. But the big amplitude part of it has broken down. And that is going to lead to the first of at least two weather systems to deal with. The first one comes through later on Thursday into Friday. And right now, boy, cross fingers, it looks, I actually use the word promising for precipitation and for more widespread precipitation. There are dynamics there. There's some Gulf of Mexico moisture available for the system to work at. So all of the right ingredients are there, more so than they've been for several weeks. So again, we're thinking positive about that one. But note here, as we move into the weekend, we'll see mainly dry and another cool, dry type of period here over the weekend on Saturday and Sunday. But look what happens by early next week again, is that it's the feature up here in central Canada on Thursday that moves down and takes the place of the trough that has been there for the last couple of days and actually is larger. You can see a big troughing feature here for early next week. So big change in the weather, cool, certainly cooler than normal, and maybe even at least normal precipitation, maybe even a little bit above normal. So I'll talk get some more details about that in just a second. For the past week, though, big, of course, more of much of what we had in May and June. Much warmer than normal week, especially for central and southern parts of the state with heat and humidity. Average temperatures for the week 8 to 12 degrees above normal, one of the warmer weeks we've had all year. So that, again, that goes without saying, just an unusually warm until the last really 24 hours or so. Just or even more importantly, looking at our precipitation totals here on the right. A couple things of note. There were some areas, as I mentioned at the beginning, very, very lucky, more than 2 inches of rain. You can see also in general, Upper Michigan had much more widespread and significant rain. Most of the UP had 1 to 2 inches, which is great, keeping up with normal accumulations. In the lower peninsula, it was much more highly variable. And you can see that, yes, there were some areas that picked up more than 2 inches, and that's in the yellow here, but they are scattered about. And most of the state, a half to maybe 1 inch, but I think the map is even a little bit probably a little smoother than actually occurred, because in many areas, and we look at individual precipitation recordings or observations, and in an area that picked up an inch just a few miles away, there was less than 1/10 of an inch. Very, very common. One other feature here to note, and it's a little difficult to see this with this pattern, but in areas near the lake shores, the big lakes, especially within 10 miles or so, there were many areas that were missed or had less rainfall. And I'm going to talk about this in just a second, because we saw some classic examples of how another way that the Great Lakes influence our climate here in Michigan have to do with the temperatures. But again, for some of the lakeshore areas, the rainfall totals in there tended to be lower than they did further inland. And the reason was, last week we had all sorts of low-level moisture, actually a lot of moisture available in the atmosphere, but there wasn't a dynamic mechanism to lift and cause widespread precipitation. It was more just scattered convection. The UP, they did a little bit better than that. They did have some dynamics, but for the lower peninsula, it was pretty much daytime convection in the mid and late afternoon into the early evening on almost a daily basis. And notice here, this is a visible satellite image from Friday at 5 p.m. in the afternoon. And it's one of these things, a picture tells, well, maybe not 1,000, but a lot of different words here. But you can see fairly clearly that there's a shadowing area next to the lakes. It's especially evident here in western lower Michigan. You can see a cloud-free area. Well, why is it doing that? And look, it goes around down to northwest Indiana, around over to the Wisconsin side of the western shore of Lake Michigan. You can also see similar areas here of shadowing off the thumb off of Lake Huron, and also look here just to the south and around the west end of Lake Erie. These are all lake breezes. And right now the lake water temperatures, it's still in the 40s in Lake Superior. Lake Michigan, and Lake Michigan's warmer than that. It's in the 50s in the northern part of the lake, and into the 60s in the south, 60s, 50s and 60s in Huron. But also there are some areas of southern Lake Huron and Erie now that have gone above 70 degrees, but it's still significantly cooler. Remember, we were dealing with maximum daytime temperatures well into the 80s, even some 90s reported late last week. So big difference in contrast. And what you have here, of course, and if you live there, you've experienced this many times, the formation of a lake breeze during the day that brings some of that cooler air inland, and it's almost like a little mini front that develops here. So a couple things about that. The one issue is that as that cooler air comes in, it suppresses convection. And you can see that's why there's no clouds, or very few clouds that show up there. And it basically pushes any of the rainfall activity further inland. Sometimes right along the leading edge of that cooler air, you will get a little bit of extra lift. And you can see some of that here in southwestern lower Michigan. And it's the Grand Rapids area that happened too, both on Thursday or on Friday and Saturday afternoons. It actually gives a little bit of extra lift. But if you're closer to the lake, you generally have much less in the way of precipitation. And that explains some of that pattern we saw on the rainfall precipitation map here. So something that happens during the warm season, another lake modification type of issue, and another reason why the lakes are so important in terms of our week to week, month to month weather here in the region. Degree day totals with the much above normal, warmer than normal week jumped. And in some cases, I believe, well, depending on where you were, we had over 150 base 50 units added, the largest increase of any week so far during the growing season. And on the right-hand side here, in terms of calendar time, this goes back to the beginning of March, we're well ahead. Most areas now have jumped to a week or even a week and a half ahead of normal, or what is normal for this time of the year, because of the last couple very, very warm weeks. So that isn't a big surprise. Soil moisture, there were some areas like in western upper Michigan, you can see some greens here. We actually added some water back to the profile. That's not easy to do in the warm season, but there was enough rain there to do that. Also in some portions of central lower Michigan that had over 2 inches, they added a little bit of moisture. And this is the plant available moisture in the top 3 feet, but over the vast majority of the state, we lost ground. And the loss was, well, typically between 2 and 4% of all of the water there. So again, it's limited, but this has occurred for most of the spring and the summer thus far. So it's another decrease of water that well, typically more would be in the profile than is there. And you can see we're at some pretty low levels, some cases less than 20% of available, or what is typically or could be available in that 3 feet. So dryness continues as a major problem. The drought monitor, and this is a big change from last week. We had a significant increase in the area in Michigan here of D2 or severe drought. And remember, prior to this week, or into last week, we were confined to southwestern lower Michigan. Well, that area has been expanded north and eastward up through portions of central lower into the Saginaw Bay and the Thumb. And now 29% of Michigan by area has been reclassified or well, a deterioration from to D2 or severe drought conditions. That's a jump of 23%. Another area of note too, not just that area, you can also see here if you look closely in northwestern lower, an area of Manistee and Benzie up into Leelanau and Grand Traverse counties also added into the D2. So in most cases, things have worsened, and now fully we have almost 93% of Michigan, all except western portions of upper Michigan, are in some form of our drought category. And that's, again, not a good place to be. That's the most we've seen in Michigan for several years. In the forecast, again, despite all that, I did mention we have changes, and we'll talk about this. This is this morning's weather map, and you can see that we are under the influence of a Canadian air mass here centered over northern Ontario. A second cool front, blue line here, moving north to south through the state. Ordinarily, that might be enough to maybe cause some convection or a shower or thunder shower, but because of the very dry air, most areas will see actually just brilliant, beautiful conditions. Daytime conditions, highs in the 70s, relatively low humidities. There is a chance, given the heating, and remember we're close to solstice, peak solar radiation rates and surface heating, we could see an isolated shower pop up, but I think that would be limited to southeastern portions of lower Michigan. Nothing to speak of, but everybody else will see pretty much diurnal, a little bit of an increase in cumulus, clouds up there, fair weather type thing, but just a gorgeous day. Northerly, northwesterly winds, and again, as I say, very dry air. By tomorrow morning, not much of a change. The axis of the high moves right over the region, and that's tomorrow morning will probably be the coolest morning of the week, with mostly seeing 40s for minimum temperatures, and possibly even a few upper 30s in interior areas of northern parts of the state. But again, most areas will see well below normal. Low temperatures, highs again tomorrow in the 70s, pretty close to what they are today. And then you can start to see off to the west here. This is the next weather system of note, or the first major weather system that I talked about. By Thursday morning, you can see it approaches. It's in a form of a frontal boundary. There's a little bit of an upper trough that's driving this as well. And we'll see the threat of showers and thunderstorms beginning probably Thursday afternoon in western upper Michigan, and then spreading west to east across the state in the overnight hours into Friday. And as I mentioned earlier, this one has lots of promise for, I think, more widespread precipitation, certainly more widespread than anything we've seen for a couple of weeks. And most of the precipitation estimates, we're thinking fairly widespread, quarter to half-inch amounts, with some even better than that. Some might be up in that 3/4 of an inch range. So for many areas, it could be the most significant rain they've seen in a while. All of that comes to an end by mid to late in the day on Friday. in the eastern part of the state. And then cooler and drier air from Canada moves in once again for the weekend. So right now we're looking at fair, dry, and seasonably cool conditions for Saturday and Sunday. And then another weather system moves in early next week, beginning overnight into Sunday into Monday. And that one also looks like it has some promise. So 2 back-to-back systems that show some promise. I don't even like to say that given where we've been, but it does. It's I think the best chances that we've seen here in several weeks. In terms of total precipitation for the week, lots of colors that we haven't seen in Michigan for some time. You can see most of the state expected to see a 1/2 to 1 inch precipitation totals. Some folks maybe even better than that. You can see some purples in here indicating maybe more than 1.5 inches. And that's by far the heaviest, or at least potential rainfall that we've seen in a long time. Again, the result of both the event here Thursday, Friday, and then the one next Sunday and Monday are the 2 leading to this. So again, looking fairly optimistic here for some water. Precipitate or potential evapotranspiration rates here for the week. Remember, we are, as mentioned, strong sun. We're going to see several sunny days. Relatively high rates of PET are expected during the upcoming week. These are the totals through next Tuesday, but you can see that those daily average rates range from around 16 or 17 hundredths in the far northern parts of the state to about 21 to 22 hundredths of an inch per day. So fairly high. Water demand is still going to be there, even though it's going to be a little bit cooler than normal. There will be strong sun and relatively low humidities and a little bit of breeze to drive that. So it doesn't have to be 90 degrees to be up above 0.2 of an inch. And this is an example of that. So again, water demand is still going to be there, something to keep an eye on, even though it'll be a little bit cooler on average. Medium range forecast guidance. We continue on the theme of change, looking here at the upper air. And this goes back to the first slide we showed, that one on the far right-hand side. It looks a lot like this. Look at this big troughing feature carved out right over the middle of the Great Lakes region. Strong likelihood, very, very high probability of this change. And that, again, cooler than normal temperatures. Now, one of the questions is, how long does this pattern last? And probably a week to maybe 2 weeks at best. That's what the thinking is right now. But it does, at least for the remaining part of June, or much of it, it suggests the temperatures are going to fall back to cooler than normal, which is a fairly big change. It also suggests more of an active weather pattern. You can see here above normal precipitation totals. Both the 6 to 10 and 8 to 14 day outlooks are fairly similar, but in the 8 to 14 day time frame, what happens is the guidance suggests that we see more of a flattening of the jet stream and ultimately a gradual warming by either maybe by the end of June, certainly by the beginning of July. And that's the last graphic I'll show you here. This is the 3 to 4 week outlook, which does include that first full week, actually first 9 days of the month of July. And you can see for that on the mean temperatures here on the left, it does suggest we do go back to warmer than normal here, probably sometime again, based on the guidance you just saw, near the end of the month. Back to a similar pattern. Precip, no direction. We're in between areas of wetter than normal conditions here to our south and drier than normal to our west. One thing I did forget to mention here, though, a little bit of a wild card, and I'll go back. You might have seen this here, and I skipped it, or I didn't deliberately do it. I just missed it here. But we do have, actually right now as we speak, we have had the formation of a second tropical storm off the mid-Atlantic. It's Tropical Storm Bill. And the good news is it's moving north and east. It may brush Newfoundland and the Canadian Maritimes, but then off into the North Atlantic and just playing a role in the climate cycle, which is great. It doesn't affect many people. But more interestingly, and I think more importantly, in the Gulf of Mexico here, there are some fairly strong signals or signs that we might see the formation of another tropical cyclone here. And if this one did get a name, it would be Claudette. And right now, I think the odds would favor that. And of course, if it's in the Gulf of Mexico, it's a very different story. It's projected to form in the Gulf, the Southern Gulf, and then maybe move northward towards Louisiana or the U.S. Gulf Coast. Now, the reason I bring this up is because the majority of these events that come, as you probably know from the past, they don't make it here. The low-level steering currents take most of the moisture, and there are tons and tons of moisture with these events. but typically stays south and east of Michigan. So what do I put it in here? Well, right now the forecast is for this thing to make landfall maybe late Friday or Saturday. And if that does happen, indeed, this will be confined, or the remnants of it, to the southeastern US. And actually, that's a bad thing because they've had so much rainfall here over the last several weeks. That's the last thing that they need. However, if, and this, there's a lot of ifs with these systems, the forecastability of them, if it takes its time and it waits maybe a couple more days, then there are indications from the jet stream that some of that moisture could be not just deflected off to the east, but move northward up into the Midwest. And then that could become a factor for us, again, as a raw material for precipitation in another event. A little bit of a wild card there. So we'll keep an eye on that. And well, by next week, either will it have happened as the models are forecasting now, or there may be some changes with additional moisture coming next week. So something to keep an eye on. That said, though, overall summing up, change in our pattern here, certainly to cooler, but also with a couple really good opportunities. And I almost this year hate to use the word good or promising, but this does look pretty good at this point. And I think most of us will see some meaningful moisture over the next several days. We'll keep fingers crossed. And then again, looking at a cooling period here for at least 1 to 2 weeks after that. And I'll stop there and see if there might be any questions.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, this rainfall we got this last week, at least in several areas down this part of the state, certainly helped a lot. Saw a lot of, it's always amazing, even an inch after how dry it was, the recovery we saw in turf growth in unirrigated areas. I think the downside is I think crabgrass is going to have a great year, which a lot of homeowners, a lot of turf professionals struggle with, but it's kind of set up perfectly with all that hot, dry weather. And now rainfall, it's in place and it's going crazy already.
It can compete pretty well. One other thing that I have noticed here in Hazlet, and it's a little bit of I think a signal of how long it's been dry, but I have noticed I've got a birch tree, and I actually noticed some leaf fall, premature senescence of leaves, and that just does not happen in June. But it's been dry enough to do that, and it's another sign that the tank is on. It's running on E.
Yeah.
I've done better with precipitation, but it really is unusually dry, and most of that moisture, of course, that comes in, even in the areas that picked up 2 inches, most of that's going to be concentrated up in the top, and of course, the roots are going to take what they can for that shallow vegetation. But at 2/10 to almost 1/4 of an inch per day, of course, with the potential losses, it's not going to last that long, and we'll need more. And hopefully we will see some here.
Yeah. Looks good. Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it. And we'll see you back here next week. Thank you.
We'll see you next week.